It's Yapping Time. Yapping Time presents you a true story of adventure and survival from the heart of Western Australia. Join us as we follow one man's journey into the wild and the moment when everything nearly fell apart. This is Into the Great Unknown. As a new migrant to Australia, the first thing that I wanted to do was embrace its wide-open spaces and natural beauty. Wilderness adventures were something that I always enjoyed when I lived in Africa, whether it was kayaking, trail running, or mountain biking. Australia has a lot to offer, and I was keen to do some exploring. In 2007, our family settled in the small town of Busselton, about 220 kilometers southwest of Perth in Western Australia, where I teach at one of the local high schools. One day, I overheard a colleague talking about exploring a cycling trail called the Munda Biddy that runs through the bush. At that time, it extended from the nearby town of Collie to Moondering in the Perth Hills, some 225 kilometers. I researched the trail and became excited about riding it during the school summer holidays. I bought some maps and began to plan my adventure. What I didn't realize, having lived in a subtropical climate with warm and humid summers, was just how brutal Western Australian summers could be, and how risky it was to ride through bushland and forests during the fire season. The Munda Biddy Trail was still new, and mobile phone coverage along the route was poor. My map-reading skills would be put to the test. The terrain was generally flat, and few visible navigational landmarks could be seen over the towering trees. However, I was fit and enthusiastic. With a week to complete the trail, I began preparing my basic mountain bike for the solo journey. I bought some cheap panniers, a few spare parts, and light camping gear. I was going to carry everything I needed. My budget didn't allow for expensive equipment or a new bike, but I was undaunted. My wife dropped me off at Collie just before midday. It was very hot, but I only had to cycle to Yari Hut, 27 kilometers away, for the first overnight stop. I had 6 liters of water and was confident that the hut's rainwater tank would have enough water to replenish. After getting lost in Collie looking for the trailhead, I finally found the trail. But it didn't take long before I realized just how hot it was. I drank water at regular intervals, and the first thing I did when I arrived at the hut was check the rainwater tank. I was relieved to find that it had water, and I refilled my bottles. I settled in and flipped through the dusty visitors register in the hut and was surprised to see how few recent entries there were. It didn't occur to me that sensible cyclists would have avoided the summer heat. I started early the next day, following the trail to my second stop at Ninglang Buja Hut. After a while, the trail markers became difficult to find. Many had been damaged by bushfires, and, without a GPS, I was becoming concerned about getting lost. I hadn't met any other cyclists along the route, and there were no fresh wheel tracks. By midday, the heat had become unbearable, and the water I was carrying was lukewarm. The display on my cycling computer had overheated and stopped functioning, and my skin was dry and salty. My lips were parched, and I was becoming increasingly disorientated and uneasy. This soon turned into full-blown panic when I realized that I was quite lost. I hadn't seen a trail marker for some time, and the path deteriorated into an old sandy firebreak. I stopped to sip a few mouthfuls of tepid water and consider my options. The sparse shade from the trees offered little respite from the scorching sun as I tried to make sense of the maps. The original plan was to stay overnight at a tourist park near Logue Brook Dam, where I would try and contact my wife, but I had no idea where I was. Wearily, I got up, remounted my bike, and started to double back in the hope of finding definite trail markers. But this only added to the problem. The surrounding trees seemed to close in on me as I desperately looked around for landmarks, and the shrill noise of the cicadas was deafening. After moving slowly along the sandy trail for about 2 hours, I was delighted to see cycle tracks that looked recent. Encouraged, I cycled on, keeping a sharp eye on the tracks. However, I soon realized that they were my own. I was covering the same ground. Discouraged, I abruptly stopped and lay my bike in the open in the hope it would be seen from the air, and retreated to the base of a tree. I had no more water, and my tongue felt swollen. I began to doze off as swarms of flies settled on me in a futile attempt to find moisture. A sudden warm gust of wind stirred me. I opened my eyes and stared at the shimmering heat waves rising off the ground. I heard the distant sound of a motor and looked feebly skywards, but the sound disappeared. A while later, I heard it again, but this time it sounded closer. I forced myself up and walked to where the sound was coming. As I crested the hill, I gasped in disbelief. There before me was Logue Brook Dam, with boats towing water skiers and people relaxing under gazebos. I returned to my bike, pushed it up the hill, and freewheeled it straight into the beautiful cool waters of the dam, where I wallowed in my full cycling kit. My first lesson on living in Australia had been delivered. Thank you for listening to this gripping tale on Yapping Time. If you enjoyed this story of adventure, survival, and the power of perseverance, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back soon with more real-life journeys and extraordinary moments. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep yapping.